This is a podcast by the News Minute, and you are listening to South Central.
Hello and welcome to South Central, a TNM podcast where we put the South at the center. I am Dhanya Rajendran. Today we're going to have a very interesting South Central, but of course valid only till Sunday. In the first part, we'll be discussing the Kerala and Tamil Nadu elections and the exit polls. And joining me in the studio is Pooja Prasanna, the reporting head of the News Minute, who travelled to both Kerala and Tamil Nadu for elections.
Yes.
Excited about the exit polls?
No, excited about the actual results.
Because you should watch Pooja's video from last year, I think.
2024, just after the Lok Sabha elections. Yeah.
10 reasons why you should not believe exit polls and why they do not matter.
And the devil is in the details. So,
yeah, and it doesn't matter which way the exit polls go, but as such, it's just part of a money-making industry. And joining us to talk about not just the exit polls, but about a lot of political developments happening in both these states are Shabir Ahmed from Tamil Nadu. Hi, Shabir.
Hi, Dhanya. Hi, Pooja.
Hello.
Shabir, if TVK does poll a lot, then you're one of the few Tamil Nadu journalists who have been saying this for some time, right?
Yes.
I thought you'll do this and not this.
Shabir did not want to say yes or no. And also joining us from Kerala is Haritha John, our Kerala bureau chief, who also went to Tamil Nadu to cover the elections. Welcome, Haritha.
Hi, Dhanya. Hi, Pooja.
And the perfect bilingual person in our office who can read, write, speak both languages and went to both states to cover, Azifa Fatima. Azifa, welcome.
Hi, Dhanya. Hi, Pooja.
So we will go to the headlines and everything. But before that, I have a quick announcement to make. This whole month, which is the month of May, we are going to be celebrating press freedom. I don't know if there's a lot to celebrate because India has fallen down in the rankings in the Press Freedom Global Index. The results were out. The rankings were out today. India is now at number 157. We'll get into more details. We'll have Lakshmi Murthy, a seasoned journalist and analyst who will be joining us in the second part of this show. We'll talk about that. But as we celebrate press freedom, I hope that you all keep in mind why an independent and robust media is essential for democracy. We are seeing what is playing out in a lot of countries. And I hope with that in mind, you will take a subscription which will help not just one, but two organizations to keep going, which is the News Minute and News Laundry. Like I said last week, we did our entire election coverage just with the help of our audience. So news can be brought to you like that without taking money from others. And press freedom matters for each one of us. You know, the News Minute and News Laundry covers only a very small segment of what is happening in the country. But press freedom in general matters to all of us because only then we'll be informed citizens, we'll be informed voters, and we'll understand what is happening around us.
I think at a time when more and more media houses are compromised and you just have to look at the coverage or look at any newspaper, you'll know that they're compromised. Even if we are a small team, whatever we can and whatever we do bring is authentic. It is verified. We don't put out anything at anyone's behest. That should count for something. So I think it's very important that you stand by us because we've taken a very difficult decision of not taking money from any of these people. So you have to stand by us so we can continue doing this work.
Okay, so we'll quickly go to the headlines.
That was me being not being too polite, by the way.
So we'll go to the headlines. Shabir, Azifa, Haritha, if you have anything to say while Pooja is reading the headlines, please do jump in.
Let's start with Kerala. UDF poised for return to power in Kerala, exit poll suggests. Most estimates place the UDF between 70 to 90 seats. The LDF is projected to get around 49 to 65 seats, while NDA is expected to win 0 to 3 seats. So I don't think this is a huge surprise to anyone, right? Load shedding returns to Kerala as power demand hits record highs. Peak electricity consumption touched an all-time high of 118.26 million units on April 27th, while demand after 6 p.m. rose to a record 6,033 megawatts. Wayanad rehabilitation, 51 families move into houses constructed by the IUML, not the government, IUML. Following the landslide, the IUML had promised a total of 105 houses and purchased 11 acres of land in the Mepadi Panchayat. Currently, 51 houses have been completed and they've been even handed over. And each of them measure around 1,060 square feet and has 3 bedrooms, a dining hall, a kitchen and a work area.
I just want to add here that I thought the coverage of the fact that the government of Kerala has built whatever 100 houses was really too much by sections of the Malayalam media, because after all the government was doing its job using the money which came through contributions of people. The government of course will make a song about it because elections were coming. It's the party's job, to make a song and dance about it. But it is not the media's job to really praise the government as if they've done something out of the way and not question the fact that the houses were not ready.
Exactly.
Even now, people have not moved in.
Moving to Andhra, Vizag, Google, Adani AI data center, state government rushed environmental clearances, activists have alleged. Who's surprised here? The AP State Environmental Impact Assessment Authority gave environmental clearance to Google and Adani Group's hyperscale data center in Vizag just days before the foundation laying ceremony. Now, activists are saying that the state government bypassed environmental appraisal from the union government and public hearings to rush the project. Our colleague Janvi has written a fairly detailed copy. But in a nutshell, the allegation is that the permissions moved at such a swift rate. Within a matter of few days, the request was submitted and it was granted. TDP raps cadres for disrupting comedy show in Bengaluru, says file cases instead. Wow. TDP State President Palla Srinivas Rao condemned the recent incident where party supporters disrupted a stand-up show by comedian Sarath Uday in Bengaluru. He urged them to take legal action against such comedians and avoid tarnishing the party's reputation by taking the law
So
into
Palla
their own hands.
Srinivas Rao clearly thinks that, okay, violence is not okay, but you can go and file how many ever cases you want against comedians.
Intimidation is okay.
That is another sort of
Violence is not.
harassment.
Yeah.
Now, one thing I can say that I've been asking a lot of comedians about reacting to some of this. So there is a bit of a skepticism because some of these jokes are misogynistic in nature, right? So the comedian, the whole industry does not know how to react to this. One thing is clear, even for misogyny, you don't need to get beaten up or you don't need to be arrested in midnight and brought from one state to the other. Or even cases registered, one can say. You can just slam those people or, not watch it. But to go to the extreme of going to I don't know about the Sharath Uday's joke, but he was performing in Bengaluru that too. And this joke was cracked 2 years ago. When there was outrage at that time, he had given an apology. So who all will the TDP cadre go and attack? They will attack the BJP leaders also who spoke ill about Naidu a few years ago.
Exactly. And also, I think comedians reflect the society. If
No, comedians, cartoonists, caricaturists, they are all coming under attack more than journalists, I would say.
Moving on to Telangana, former MP K. Kavita launched the Telangana Rashtra Sena on April 25th in Hyderabad, taking a direct swipe at her father, KCR, and the Bharat Rashtra Samiti, which is what it's now called. She said Telangana dream remains unfulfilled.
It's actually a family dispute. I don't know if it will translate to any different kind of promise or governance because her grouse is that she was not given her due in the family. But I'm just glad that there's one more woman politician out there with her own party. Hopefully, unlike Sharmila, she won't be merging very soon with another party.
Right. Activists allege forceful relocation of Chenchu families from Tiger Reserve. A forum representing Chenchus, a particularly vulnerable tribal group in Telangana, has criticized a recent rally that sought to portray Chenchus as agreeing to their relocation from Amrabad Tiger Reserve in Nagar Kurnool district. Moving on to Tamil Nadu, all exit polls show DMK lead. Access My India says TVK will win a minimum of 98 seats. Multiple exit polls ahead of the Tamil Nadu Assembly election results project a lead for the DMK, a second position for the AADMK, and a notable debut impact for actor Vijay's TVK as a third force. I wonder what he saw so drastically different than others, but we'll discuss that in detail. From death row to the bar, Perarivalan enrolls as lawyer to practice in the Madras High Court. Freed in 2022 after over 3 decades in prison in the Rajiv Gandhi assassination case, A.G. Perarivalan has enrolled as an advocate and will practice at the Madras High Court, focusing on prisoners' rights and anti-death penalty cases.
So, in this thing, Congress MP R. Sudha, like Lok Sabha MP from Mailadurai, has opposed this and, sent a letter saying that he was just released merely on the ground of inordinate and unexplained delay, and that doesn't make him, innocent. And also, she has cited the Advocates Act saying that within 2 years, nobody can become a lawyer. But the Bar Association has said that he can become a lawyer because he's well past the 2 years limit, and he has also finished his course into that, right? And the Congress opposition comes from their own place of history as well.
Like I've been saying, Perarivalan's case is different, or how it is perceived is very different. One is that there is a CBI officer who appeared a few years ago and said that Perarivalan was a minor, by the way, when the assassination happened, that he did not write the full confession, and he thinks Perarivalan was not aware of why the batteries were bought. And second, Perarivalan's mother, Arpudammal, had become the face of a protest to release him for many, many years. So there is a different way in which Perarivalan is viewed compared to the others who were convicted for the assassination.
Moving on to Karnataka, Bengaluru, 7 people dead after Bowring Hospital wall collapses in heavy rain. Rain lashed several parts of the city for a couple of hours, triggering the collapse of the wall that killed 7 people. Several others were injured as well. And across the city, residents struggled to commute. Even where our office is in Central Business District, it was quite bad. There were hailstones all around. In related news, Bengaluru logs highest ever April rain as storms unleash and flooding was seen in many parts of the city. Nearly 78 mm of rain fell in just 30 minutes, causing some of the season's worst flooding.
78 mm in just 30 minutes in a city like Bengaluru, where water cannot drain out really fast, and the stormwater system is also questionable. Like, it's not even complete. Our office in the CBD, it was so bad here. We could not open the door because water was gushing in. Nearby, the Bowring Hospital wall collapsed and 8 people died there. It was pretty bad, and this is just April.
Yeah. There is a saying in Kannada, Ativrishti, Anavrishti. You are complaining about no rain and heat, and then when it comes, this is how it comes. Bengaluru man equates filming women without consent to CCTV. The High Court refuses relief. Thank God. BK Digan, the man behind the Instagram account Bengaluru Metro Chicks, claimed that his actions were not illegal.
So this basically said that, CCTVs also capture women just walking, so why can't I do it? He was putting these pictures on Instagram and then trying to make money off it. I don't know how many of you follow my colleague Shivani Kawa. If you don't, please do follow her on Instagram and Twitter. So Shivani had done a story a few months ago about a man who ran a similar account where he was filming women walking on Brigade Road, etc., in different kinds of angles, perverted angles, and then uploading. And he had thousands and thousands of followers. He was clearly making this a proper, well-run thing. After Shivani did the story, he was arrested. One day, Shivani was walking on Brigade Road. So remember, Shivani does not know how this man looks. She simply knows that he's running the Instagram account. She knows the name because the police arrested him. She was walking down on Brigade Road when suddenly a man came to her and said, "Are you not Shivani Kawa from the News Minute? You got me arrested." That was a very scary moment because he was very angry with her. Then, of course, we do have certain,
checks and balances
process in place when our reporter is in danger. So we did all that. But for someone like Shivani to be encountering this kind of a person, and I think he will continue doing that from some other account, because these guys will never stop. And you must have seen all these stories on BBC, etc., where they're using the Meta and these glasses now which have the camera. So people are not even aware that their visuals are being taken.
I'm also thinking of the thousands of followers that these people have. They should also look at what is the cost of just one follow and having some perverted curiosity and, enabling these kind of perverts. That's it for the headlines for this week.
Okay, so we move to the Kerala and Tamil Nadu polls. Remember, all this is valid only till Sunday night.
Exactly 3 days.
Yes, because Monday we'll have the election results. So lots of exit polls results have come yesterday. Metris, PMark, People's Pulse, Poll Diary, JVC, Janmat polls, then Access by India. And these polls have all given, for Tamil Nadu, for example, many of these polls have said that the DMK will be forming the government, though not all of them have given a halfway mark for the DMK itself. Remember, the Tamil Nadu Assembly has...
DMK alliance.
I'm saying for the DMK itself, because 234 assembly segments, halfway mark is 118. Last time, the DMK alone crossed the halfway mark at 133. This year, a lot of the surveys, though saying the DMK plus, which is DMK alliance, will form the government, they have not said that the DMK will cross, right? So that itself is one peg down for the DMK, I would say. And the second most surprising poll, of course, is from Access My India and Pradeep Gupta. I think that's the only one which has been making headlines for now. That poll says that Vijay's TVK party will get 98 to 120 seats. And the same applies for the DMK. And the AIDMK will be the big loser. Now, Kerala, the exit polls are more or less the same. Everybody has given UDF the edge. 71 is the halfway mark, and UDF will touch almost 80, is what almost all the surveys have given. So I'm going to start with Shabir. Shabir, what are your thoughts about the exit polls? But remember, before we get into the discussion, to everyone here, we are journalists. We are not psephologists or political strategists. We can only tell about what we see on the ground from people we meet, but we can have opinions about exit polls. Right, Shabir?
So, Dhanya, my take on the exit polls is take it with a pinch of salt, because I remember in 2016, almost all exit polls said the DMK is going to win, except C Voter, which was commissioned by Times Now. And C Voter said AIADMK is going to come back to power, and all the other exit polls were wrong. So I think exit polls may go wrong. So that has happened in the past, and this time I feel the same. But what I can say is, like, with Access, there's only one thing that I feel that Access, though, forget about the numbers, but it has captured the mood is what I believe. Because the competition was between DMK and TVK. That's how close the election was. And that has been predominantly captured in the Access My India poll. And there was also a couple of other polls which said that there was a competition between TVK and DMK. So initially, in all the opinion polls that were conducted earlier, they said TVK is not going to win even one seat. TVK is not going to win seats in double digits. But if you look at the exit polls, all of them have given double digits for TVK, which clearly goes to show that the party had the power to convert seats. And that is something that, many other opinion polls had underestimated as far as TVK is concerned, because the mood on the ground was totally different. Because Vijay, coming up with the new party, contesting his first elections alone, there was a lot of sentiments that were in his favor. That's something that I have been seeing on ground for the past 2.5 years, and I've been consistently talking about it. And one thing which is very clear is Vijay is a household name. Vijay's popularity is something which is huge, and people are responding to him. The one thing I was disappointed was with the way how the Dravidian parties were handling TVK Chief Vijay, because they were all like, kind of like they were all scared, or they were all like trying to minimize his impact. But in that attempt, what they started doing is they were all trying to underestimate TVK, and a lot of ecosystem that both the DMK or the AIDMK that has built, they were all trying to underestimate him. And that became one of the biggest strengths for the TVK.
So I was talking to strategist after these numbers came out. Now, for everybody's understanding, it's a small percentage which will be make or break for Vijay, right? So before the elections, I'm saying, let's say 1.5 weeks before the elections, people were talking about Vijay polling between 15 to 20%. 20% were the people who are extremely confident that Vijay will do well in the urban areas. It was always believed that Vijay will do well in the urban areas and not do as well in the rural areas. But that 20% became 22 when the elections were just about to happen. But I think Vijay peaked. TVK peaked in the last 2-3 days, and especially the last speech which Vijay made seems to have made a connection with people. So after the polls happen, a lot of these people who are saying 20%, 22%, including journalists who have traveled, strategists working with the DMK and the Congress, who we all speak to, they all kept saying that from 22, we believe he could have moved to 25 or even 30, right? So even when he's at 30%, Vijay can still be getting 30% of the vote, which means he has eroded both the DMK and the AIDMK, perhaps the AIDMK more. But seat-wise, he would be stuck below 30, max 40. That's what the belief was. What Axis My India has done is push that 30 to 35. And that 5% makes a huge difference, because then that means that Vijay has eaten into the vote banks of the DMK, the AIDMK, the NTK, everybody, literally everybody. Now, I'm just looking at the Axis numbers. Now, Axis has said the sample size is 44,000, and they've got both rural and urban, 52% rural and 48% urban, right? What is very interesting is that every age group, they've taken 19 to 20% of people. But 18 to 19 is only 3. I'm wondering if they had taken more from 18 to 19,
It would have gone even more.
Vijay's number would have gone up. The other thing is that if you look at these percentages, the DMK plus is doing 35%. That is a sharp drop, because last time it was 38% for the DMK, plus 4% for the Congress, 1% for VCK, 1% for CPIM, and 1% for CPI. The AIDMK plus is at 23% this time, very, very sharp decline, where AIDMK was at 33 last time, BJP 3 and PMK 4. So according to this, it is mostly the AIDMK votes. So the strategists I spoke to pointed out 2 things. Okay, one is that something seems wrong with the My Axis India poll, because if Vijay has to get above 35 or even crack 35, he has to do well at least in 3 different zones of Tamil Nadu. You take west, south, east, west, north, south, and also the Chennai region, etc. But according to this poll, he's mainly doing well only in the Chennai region and then one more region. So how can that be that just with 2 regions, he cuts this much? Because in one region, it's the DMK doing better, one region is AIDMK better. So the math doesn't add up. And that strategy says that even if it's a 31, Vijay reaches 31, they are now believing that Vijay will not come down below 50 seats. So whatever it is, let's say Vijay does 30%, Vijay does 35%, I still think it's really great for a first-time party.
Yeah.
And that's the real question here, right? Now, whether Vijay will get 98 seats or they will get just 40 seats, the point is a debutant party polling 25 to 35% is itself remarkable, and which should in turn lead the AIDMK and the DMK to ask questions to themselves, what went wrong?
I think that might be a little too simplistic. There is also perhaps fatigue, boredom with just two formations.
No, what went wrong is that fatigue also.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. And AIDMK has taken itself out of the game by allying with the BJP. Many people who perhaps wanted to not vote for DMK now no longer look at AIDMK as a viable option. I think that is the game changer.
One thing which I did not cover this election, but Pooja, you can also pitch in. But when I went even 1 month before, one sentiment which was very prevalent was that people were saying, oh, he's an actor who's earning so much money. He has left all this and come for us. Did you believe that sentiment was prevalent?
So let me, and I'm sure Azifa might agree with me because we did go to many places together. What struck me was it seemed like a script handed out to people. And these are not people who are attached to the party or anything. So this 200 crore number kept resurfacing in most of the conversation. He could have he's leaving 200 crores incoming. Not some vague number, very clearly. He could have lived a comfortable life. He's coming here for us. So let's give him one chance. We want to change. These are 4 things that kept recurring.
200 crore is because he charges 100 crore per movie. And if he does 2 movies a year, that's 200 crore.
Yeah. So that's the logic. As if in most parts, that's what we kept hearing, right?
Yeah, and the script also has like a specific number of points, right? Like even in the South when I went out, the first point obviously is that he's leaving his money, fame and everything for us. The second thing is that we need change. Like he will give that change. And people are damn sure that Vijay is going to bring that change. But when we ask what change, like what change do you expect? What will he give? we never got an answer. We never got a clear answer from anybody. And also another important point that everybody, like literally everybody I spoke to said is that he will protect women. And again, when we ask, how do you think he's going to protect women? What are the measures he's going to take? What is he going to protect you from? There is no answer. And largely it felt to me like, a script from his film also handed down to the party and the cadre and everybody, because we saw at least Vijay on the screen protecting women, bringing change and being the single person against the system and, emerging as a victor and everything. And that is what we see in the ground. And another important point after polling, whenever I met person, the point that Vijay made about approaching the kids, right? Like you make your parents vote for me, you throw tantrums or whatever. That has actually worked, I feel, because a lot of voters that I met, like traditionally DMK voters, have said, okay, my kid, they were crying and they just told me to vote for TVK. Anyway, the future is for them. So I just voted for them. And I think that is one very strategic move that he made, just before the thing ended.
Yeah. Also interesting, Dhanya, this thing of women, right? Women being unsafe, drugs and all of that. I feel it's the ADMK, particularly EPS, who for years set the narrative that there are these problems. And I'd like Shabi to come in on this as well.
But the data doesn't support that.
The data doesn't support that because NCRB data, not even the state data, shows that crime rate has come down under DMK. As far as this drug is concerned, we did discuss in the previous episode of South Central, there is no proof, no data that shows that drug usage has gone up. If anything, it is much better off in Tamil Nadu. But the ADMK has
much better off as in ganja, etc. Tamil Nadu seizures have been much lesser. It's only 4th, I think, in South India itself.
Correct, out of the 5 states in South. ADMK made, that narrative very prevalent. Women started thinking, oh, we're unsafe under this government. And Vijay is perhaps reaping the benefit of that. Shabi, do you think that?
See, there are a couple of issues that were playing on top of people's mind when they were going to the police station. Like Azifa pointed out, women's safety, drug menace. And then there were a lot of reports about POCSO cases being reported in several parts of Tamil Nadu. These are all issues that really did matter. But the point is that the principal opposition party, AIADMK, did not do enough. They did not pick up these issues. They did not go to town. They did not create some kind of pressure on the DMK government it was that sentiment that allowed Vijay to, pick up these issues, and Vijay was able to capture the imagination of people. So I would say that there is also this DMK ecosystem that was constantly trying to, belittle Vijay, that was constantly trying to downplay these issues. That has angered a lot of women. So I think in all of this, if you say, like Dhanya pointed out, the manner in which Vijay had, conducted his election campaign, he peaked in the last 2 days. That was a very well calculated move. His team was plotting everything from day one. They had a proper script and they were working towards that. In fact, I have been interacting with some of them. They said, like, we wanted to do that on the last day of the campaign. We wanted Vijay to speak for 45 minutes. It was like some top secret operation. They never told anyone that he's going to appear in person and speak at the Nandanam grounds. Because the other opposition parties were thinking that he will be visiting Perambur on the day of the campaign, and he'll be doing a door-to-door campaign in Perambur. So they had blocked the entire, permission from the election commission by all these dummy candidates had blocked that, the permissions, and Vijay was unable to enter Perambur. But what he did was he spoke in Nandanam for 45 minutes on various issues. He went after BJP, he went after AIADMK. So that speech really played a crucial role in bringing a lot of people out of their homes. And there are a few things that I noticed from the beginning is that there is renewed interest in politics. A lot of apolitical people are talking about politics. A lot of students, a lot of youngsters are talking about politics. So that created some sort of a buzz across Tamil Nadu. So, in 2021, what we saw was the DMK's IT wing was very active. They were trying to set the narrative and all that. In this case, in Vijay's case, there are a lot of other people who have took it upon themselves and they were campaigning for him. And that is how the issues like women's safety, drug issue, law and order problems and road issues, basic issues, everything was like brought into the, campaign. So it was not Vijay who was campaigning. It was actually people who follow Vijay, people who want Vijay to become the chief minister. They were campaigning on his behalf. And that's how these campaigns happened. And if I have traveled extensively during this election season, and in most of the places, I could not see Vijay's candidates on the streets. Or we couldn't even find one election camp office. There are a few places where they had some kind of structural work. But in all the other places, when I inquired them, they said like, okay, we haven't seen Vijay's candidate coming here for campaigning and all that. The candidate doesn't matter. In this election, nobody thought that, nobody asked who is the candidate in my area. A lot of people voted only for Whistle, only for Vijay. So that is a new phenomenon here. So and a lot of his campaign happened within the four walls of, their houses. Like Azifa pointed out, children were campaigning for Vijay. There were youngsters, there were college-going students who were campaigning for Vijay. There were school-going students who were trying to convince their parents for Vijay. And that seems to have changed a lot. That is why till the polling day, we could not find out actually what people were thinking. But after polling, there was a drastic change in the way people came out and said that they voted for Vijay. And this time, the DMK and the AIADMK, all these established political parties had given a lot of money. And all these political parties are stunned because they were damn sure that if you give money, people will vote for them. But now people have taken money and they voted for Vijay. And people are like saying it openly. In some cases, the beige pant and white shirt that Vijay's party workers wore in the booths, they say that idella DMK, ADMK kodutha kaasla dhaan we bought. So that's how, things were on ground on the election day.
So a couple of points. One, of course, the caveat continues that we still don't know if they have taken money and voted for Vijay. These are just exit polls, so let's put that out there. But one point, Shabir, I don't agree with that AIADMK didn't do a good job of communicating this. I just think that they didn't get the kind of media coverage. They don't have star power, right? So they were not covered as much. Look at the disproportionate space that media has given to Vijay. So when EPS is talking about these issues, they don't get covered. But I think it was the ADMK that set the narrative against the DMK government, which Vijay spoke of later, but it caught the popular imagination much more.
So I want to come to Harita. Now, one thing which all the DMK leaders are saying, now they are still maintaining that they will form the government, that all these that Access My India exit poll is wrong, right? They're very confident of forming the government. But any DMK leader you speak to will clearly say that Chennai is one region where they have not performed well and they are actually scared about the outcomes. In fact, Pradeep Gupta was saying in India Today that all the bigwigs in Chennai will face it difficult this election, and he named MK Stalin also. He said, I'm not saying they're going to lose, but they're going to find it very difficult. That's something which the DMK will concede, that Chennai has been very difficult for
But
them.
they had been saying this at least a couple of weeks before the elections.
But Chennai
also
was their stronghold, right? For Chennai to go to TVK, and also if you are talking about, the Tamil Nadu doing so well as a state when it comes to per capita, GSTP, whatever, it is Chennai which actually bears the fruit of a lot of these things other than the other two-tier cities. So in that cities, they're not going to vote for the DMK.
Okay, two quick points before you go to Harita. So in Tamil Nadu, I think particularly your argument would be true of, say, a Karnataka, where all the development investment is Bangalore-centric. That is not the case in Tamil Nadu. It is fairly
No, I'm not
decentralized,
disagreeing
right?
with that.
Yeah. But on the infrastructure thing, I think the larger point is that Vijay, whether you agree or not, he says that he's going to take forward the Dravidian politics and all of that. But he has depoliticized the elections like Aam Aadmi Party had to a large extent. Not as bad. When you focus on certain things and don't talk much about ideology, I think that is depoliticizing elections. So when you do that in urban areas, they tend to do much better.
And one DMK leader told me that he has actually transgressed, what is the word, I don't know, all religion and caste lines.
Correct.
Which that leader told me is good in one way. Harita, I'll come to you, went to the coastal zones, right? And in your story, you wrote that even there is a lot of anti-incumbency which can translate to vote for Vijay and some for AIDMK also.
In coastal region, there is actually a TVK wave in coastal regions, especially in the Christian-dominated regions like Kanyakumari and even in the Chennai coastal regions too. So for them, TVK is a perfect alternative. There's an anti-incumbency against DMK, and also they are kind of tired with AIDMK because AIDMK is aligning with BJP, and they cannot in Kanyakumari region they are complete opponent of BJP, so they want a perfect alternative, which they have seen in Vijay's party. That is one thing, and another is a common trend as we see, like the children, the youngsters, all the youngsters, those who have vote and those who doesn't have vote, like all the youngsters are in support of TVK, and that has also changed scenario in these regions. And also in Christian regions, religion also matters. Some of them were talking to me, even the religious leaders were talking to me, saying like he's a Christian, and especially in Kanyakumari region, we need a Christian leader, and not just Christian leader, a Christian from fishing community. So other parties, like all after it's been a long time that in the coastal constituencies of Kanyakumari, they have not got a candidate from their community who's a Christian, as well as from the fishing community. So even Vijay's candidate is not from the community, but they are kind of angry that like after so many years they are not getting a candidate from their community. But this time the Congress has fielded a person from their community in one of the constituencies. But the thing is that they are angry that their representation is not there. So that anger is also one of the factors to support Vijay in this coastal region.
Azifa, we'll come to you. Then we have to go to Kerala. We can't ignore the state just because there are no fanciful predictions from the area.
No, one thing that I agree with Pooja is that Vijay's entry has completely depoliticized the entire election field and the people also. Like when Shabir said, a lot of apolitical people also talk about politics now. Like one thing that I noticed is that they are not talking politics. They are talking about Vijay. Even when we go and talk about what are your needs, like what are the demands that you have for your constituency, Pooja will remember that we asked a lot of people in Perambur, and they could think of not a single thing that they want in their constituency, except for the fact that Vijay will bring a change. So in a lot of places, people are stuck on talking about Vijay and how he looks like MGR, he talks like MGR, he's going to bring this, he's going to bring that. They have stopped talking about what their needs are, what our necessity is, and what are our demands right now. And the whole conversation that DMK has built about federalism, state-center relationship and everything, that doesn't even have a little space in the whole TVK ecosystem is what I feel.
No, and imagine that every year we have controversies around federalism, Hindi, etc. That did not become a conversation at all this election. So a lot for the AIDMK and DMK to ponder on, even if the DMK does come to power.
But I think this is a cycle, no, Dhanya? This keeps happening, right? In any state that has seen just two giants kind of occupy the space, when there is a change, people will go. Now, I don't know what will happen, whether...
Also, someone pointed out to me that the English media, especially, has created this whole thing that MGR and Jayalalitha were simply film actors who became successful in politics.
Exactly.
They weren't. They were part of political systems for many years before they came.
Exactly.
So they are actually politicians who are also movie stars, right?
Yeah.
But that gave Vijay also a push that, okay, because MGR and Jayalalitha did it, he can.
Can I just add before we go to Kerala?
No, we have to go to Kerala.
It is not about Tamil
Everybody
Nadu.
one line
Just
each.
1 second.
One line each. Yes.
It's a larger point I'm making about exit polls itself. And, you know, when we were doing research for a story earlier, 2004, they predicted that Vajpayee's government will come back. The same Access My India in 2021 West Bengal elections predicted a huge victory for BJP. That was not the case.
2024, 400 plus for
400
BJP. Plus.
I'm coming to that.
And
yes.
Pradeep Gupta's famous crying on screen.
First dancing and then crying and all of that. The point I'm simply trying to make is this. I'm not dissing this agency versus the other. There are so many details that go into it. Did you do face-to-face interview? Did you call up people on the phone? Did you speak to them separately? Did you speak to them as part of a crowd? Because answers vary depend on that. You know, this herd mentality tends to make people say a certain thing. So many such things. So without getting into those metrics, just going by the final numbers, I think is a disservice. In my opinion, we should do away with exit polls. They serve zero purpose, opinion polls and exit polls and all that. But since we're discussing, yeah.
Shabir, one line for you, which means you'll say 10.
For the DMK, the anti-BJP plank, it helped them in 2019. It helped them in 2021. It helped them in 2024. Another election, you come up with the same, narrative. People are not going to, receive it that well. That is something that I found when people were talking about hyper-local issues. Like you go to different constituencies, people are talking about different issues. And it was TVK that was responding to these issues. TVK candidates were promising, they're saying, if there is a local Taskmark shop here, I want that shop to be closed. The people of this area want that shop to be closed. The TVK candidates were all actually promising, saying, we'll do it. When you elect us, we'll do it. And there's also one more thing, why federalism or the issues that is between union government and the state government did not become an issue is because it's been talked so much that people are tired of listening to the same thing again and again, and the DMK did not come up with any new narrative in this election. So that is one of the reasons why the DMK's campaign did not take off, and even the AIADMK's campaign did not take off. In fact, Prime Minister visited, Home Minister visited, 5 chief ministers, BJP chief ministers visited. We had no idea when did they come and when did they go. So that was the kind of situation here. People are not bothered.
Harita, UDF is coming back to power is what all the exit polls are saying. I don't think that is very surprising
no.
because a lot of people did think that anti-incumbency will be there and it's 10 years of the government, right? Even then, what are the local polls saying? I think Manorama had one. Harita, like, are some of the bigwigs of the CPIM going to lose, or is everybody, because they made almost all MLAs stand elections again, right? So are all the ministers, big MLAs going to win, or are they also going to lose?
Yeah, there are a few hot seats that CPIM themselves have analyzed that they might lose, just like Kalamasheri constituency, P. Rajiv, Industries Minister, and Dritala, MB Rajesh, our local self-government minister, and Veena George from Aramulla. These are all some of the hot seats that party themselves are not sure about winning. But see, Manorama Seawater survey, we cannot rely on that fully, because last time too the seawater was not accurate in Kerala. Only the Chanakya and Axis survey was kind of accurate, but LDF gained more than they predicted. So this time, but yes, even if the exit polls are to be believed, I feel that UDF has not performed enough to gain from the anti-incumbency that was reflected in the ground. So there was so much anti-incumbency. There was an anti-Pinarayi wave, but they were not able to work on it properly.
No, I just want to add that is a very good point, that 10 years of Pinarayi Vijayan, there is a lot of anger against the Chief Minister himself, which the CPIM will tell you off record, that if there is anti-incumbency, it's actually anti-incumbency for Pinarayi Vijayan, not for ministers, not for policies, not for the government itself.
But Tanya,
UDF couldn't capture it well.
Absolutely. And in fact, they turned that into a positive also, right? Yes, it was so polarized, the opinion on Pinarayi Vijayan. People thought he was too arrogant, too authoritarian. But on the other side, they also thought he was a very strong leader. They couldn't demolish that image. And look at, after 10 years in a state like Kerala, I understand some other states, you're still getting just about 15-20 seats less than UDF.
But we live in an era where people are looking for strong leaders, right? Authoritative is no longer a problem.
Yeah.
They want
It's not a negative at all. It's almost a positive.
Many of the surveys have pointed that they want Pinarayi Vijayan as CM. Like when all these surveys predict an edge to UDF, but whom do you want to be as CM? Like the most of the surveys have most of the people have chosen Pinarayi Vijayan again. 33% is for Pinarayi Vijayan, and it's only 20 to 25% for VD Sadishan. It is because the UDF's lack of clarity on a strong leader whom they are projecting. They don't have a strong leader to project. They don't even have a strong set of leaders to project to. So that internal feud, that internal issues within the UDF is actually reflecting in the opinions of the people too. And that is something they have to work on, this, even if they win in these elections.
Even when we spoke to a lot of people for the Pinarayi story that we were doing, one thing that they said is what Harita was saying. In the UDF, we don't have a clear leader or any one person or two person who can take forward things, while Pinarayi is seen as this person who will get things done and who has his entire party and coalition behind him. Like that unity sort of thing. And in times like this, especially in when BJP's threat is there and there are other international issues going on, they want a leader who can take a decision and who can act on it. That is something a lot of people were talking about.
That is what we saw in 2021. There was an LDF wave, and that was clearly visible, that LDF wave, and they were projecting, and that after floods, after COVID, that Pinarayi was projecting himself as a leader, that the same thing UDF could not do this time, even after 10 years of LDF rule.
No, I want to add one thing. Do you think it's okay for a party to get elected back to back? Because what happened to AIADMK is a lesson, right? Like if you are in government for more than 10 years, then you tend to lose out, a lot. Then that becomes a problem.
They say CPIM performs best when they're in opposition because they know exactly how to take up issues. But this logic that you applied somehow doesn't apply to BJP in other states. We're not going to get into it because we're not looking at BJP.
I just want to say, Shabir, that this whole conversation that the CPM should not come back to power was started by very hardcore left thinkers in Kerala, including writer Sachidanandan, who said that if a party like this comes to power for 3 or 4 terms, to sustain, to be in power again, they will go with religious groups. They will have to,
make compromises.
Even Aam Aadmi Party, right? I mean, not comparing it to the
Please,
CPIM,
yes.
but just that you have to do everything. The same way Pinarayi Vijayan has been now accused of going with Vellapalli Nadeshan and a lot of other groups, which are highly problematic and communal, right? And now to the bigger question of this election. If the UDF comes to power, who will become the chief minister? Now, I'll tell you what I have heard, which Harita does not agree with at all. So I was told by one of the people in the Congress, in fact, more than one, that the High Command does not like VD Sadishan too much. There have been incidents in the recent past where apparently in one of the CEC meetings, VD Sadishan said, I have a flight to go back, and just left. In another one, he apparently told Rahul Gandhi something which was not so polite. So there is, and Kharge also was irritated with him at one point and told him not to be petulant. So it seems the High Command is not fully agreeable with VD Sadishan as a choice. And they also think that VD Sadishan became a face of the Congress just
because he was leader of opposition.
Just because he was the leader of the opposition, just by virtue of that position, not because of anything he did. So VD Sadishan is not their top priority, nor is Ramesh Chennithila. KC Venugopal wants to be the chief minister. He is moving every card possible. But there is a thinking in Delhi that Rahul Gandhi would not want KC to leave, not just because it doesn't look good to parachute KC, but Rahul Gandhi wants KC in Delhi. Read this profile by my colleague Maria Teresa, where she looks at what is this attachment that Rahul Gandhi has to KC Venugopal. So then who is the chief minister?
Could I just come in
No,
one
I
quick
want to finish
point?
suspense, right? So dark horse, a lot of people are saying, could be K. Muralidharan, Karunakaran's son.
Okay. Now, on the KC Venugopal point, this is very much like Kharge wanting to be CM. Of course, it's not fair to compare KC Venugopal with a Kharge because he's a tall leader.
Kharge is a tall leader.
Kharge is a very tall leader and deserves to be the CM in every way. But the fact is that this entire theory of Congress, where they don't go in to elections with a strong leader, with a face, and then decide later, I think it's time for them to rethink this very position. It's something they've held on to for for a long time because they think that other leaders will not work if you announce one candidate. But look at the states where they've managed to win. It's only because, yes, despite them not announcing, in Rajasthan there was an Ashok Gehlot, in Karnataka there was Siddaramaiah and DK Shivakumar, both of whom are strong faces. So they have to now rethink this very policy. But a quick point, Congress, unlike a BJP, does take MLAs into consideration.
Yeah, so they are also saying
Yeah.
that these people I'm talking to are also saying that eventually the only chance VD Satishan has for becoming a chief minister is if a lot of MLAs
Put their
will
faith.
say, I want VD Satishan. But the High Command is expecting that more MLAs will say yes to KC than to VD Satishan, because there is apparently, I think it's a very Delhi viewpoint. Delhi thinks that VD Satishan is too arrogant. I don't think in Kerala there is such an opinion amongst a lot of the MLAs. Now, if it comes down to one choice, right? MLAs are saying, I want this person or that person, or the MLA will say, I will leave it to the High Command. Now, when you leave it to the High Command is what I was talking about, which is you have 4 names, of which K. Muralidharan could be the dark horse. And, I feel like they can't even promise the 50-50 anymore, considering it was not kept up in Karnataka, which, by the way, will be in the news again after this rain.
Oh, Lord.
Because DK Shivakumar is going to push to become the chief minister, considering, remember, we told you, after elections are over, that will come. So, any last comments, Harita and Azifa, about Kerala? Too much these Tamil Nadu people take time. Yeah, Harita.
Why are you looking at me? I'm not a Tamil Nadu person.
K. Muralidharan factor is always because when Padmaja Venugopal left the party, she has been brushing his ego since then, saying like they have been in the party for a long time and they have this legacy of K. Karunakaran, but still he has not given any positions in the party. So that has been going on for a while. So K. Muralidharan is always a factor, but not so evidently present. But yeah, he was always a factor.
Thank you, Harita, Azifa, and Shabir. We will be meeting on the 4th of May. News Laundry and the News Minute will have live coverage from 12 to 4 o'clock. Please be there. The first 2 hours will be anchored by Pooja, me, and Shabir, and then taken over by Manisha and Atul from News Laundry. Remember, even if you have TV sets on your laptop, you can stream us, because that's also how you say you support independent media.
May I just say, but do switch off your TV sets? It's
I-
for
I
your
mean,
own mental health.
I think on polling day, on
Have you
counting
watched
day.
a news channel on election day last few years?
But I think on counting day, we can't tell people to fully switch off. You must switch on. Us also is. I think
No, I am saying switch off TV for your mental health, not even just for us, and watch independent news organization.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, so after that discussion on elections, we come to something equally important. It is about press freedom. The RSF Global Press Freedom Index has just come out. And like I said in the beginning, it doesn't look good for India. We have slipped to 157. But for the first time in history, Reporters Without Borders, or RSF, says that over half of the world's countries now fall into the difficult or very serious categories for press freedom. So it's not just India. Across the globe, journalists are feeling the pinch. Journalists are being killed, intimidated, threatened. It's not good news across many, many countries. And joining us to talk about this is someone who extensively studies the media, friend, colleague, Lakshmi Murthy, who is the co-founder and co-editor of Free Speech Collective. Lakshmi, thank you for coming to the studio.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
It took me a lot of intimidation to ensure that
Yes.
she comes to the
I'm
studio.
here under severe threat.
Yes, media under
So
threat.
much for press freedom, huh?
Lakshmi is also one of the founders of the Network of Women in Media, which we are all part of. It is one of the biggest collectives of women journalists in the country. So Lakshmi, you looked at the index. India is at 157 now. We were 151 last year. But we have done worse than this. We're at 159 at one point of time. The numbers don't look good globally. Many countries are doing quite bad. You have been studying what's been happening in India, right? What are your first thoughts?
My first thought was, we're sinking lower and lower. I think those little blips of a few places on the index matter, but don't matter as much as the overall decline. And we have been seeing an overall decline in this millennium. It was 120 on the list in 2004. So we are seeing in 22 years a pretty severe dip. And I guess we're in bad company globally, so to say, because what we see across the world is where situations are the worst is war-torn countries, countries in conflict, countries in open war, Palestine, Afghanistan, Sudan, and so on. So, what is it that places us at the bottom? And I think the RSF report, which is very correctly pointed out, and they've used a very interesting word called legal arsenal. And that's also very, militaristic terms, because something we've coined in India is lawfare. So instead of open warfare with weapons and so on, the law is being weaponized against the media. And that seems to be a global trend, but we've seen that increasingly being used in India. And we see also the Free Speech Collective, we had done a report looking at cases of violations of press freedom last year. And we found a stupendous number, something like 14,000 plus. 14,875 violations. These violations, we counted each one because each one matters. And they were, the bulk of them were instances of mass censorship, where you shut down the internet or slow down the internet. And these are ways in which you are blockading reporting, literally, and blockading the people's right to know. So when we look at such mass scale of censorship of various kinds, of intimidation and so on, the number of journalists killed may not be as much, fortunately, that's a good thing, but there are other ways in which the media is being squeezed, and the legal route has emerged as one of the favorite tools of controlling the media the world over, and particularly in India.
So I think one misunderstanding that people have when they look at the index is that, oh, how can India be so bad, right? Because they believe that these indexes only look at what is the government doing to the media. But actually, that's not all. An index will look at, yes, government oppression. And when we talk about government oppression here, it is not just the union government. All state governments also oppress in different ways. We have seen even the data from Sahyog portal, how a lot of the opposition parties, including the TMC, the DMK, etc., have been using Sahyog portal to remove posts, etc., by media. And like you were saying, shutdowns. I'm just looking at the data. So SFLC maintains a data of internet shutdowns. We have seen, I think they are looking at total of 920 shutdowns. Recent shutdown was April 17th in Assam. Before the 2 days before that, there was in Manipur. That is counted, internet shutdowns. Who owns the media is counted. And in India, a lot of the media houses are owned by politicians, by real estate groups, by industrialists of all hue and color. And it's not like people who have been in the media industry for a long time, right? These are people with vested interests. So media ownership, I think, is one of those things that really pulls down India in the rankings. Because when your media is owned by people with vested interests, what your media propagates changes drastically, and that puts your population in danger because there is no free flow of information. And finally, censorship. How much censorship is happening is also taken into account. Intimidation by legal routes. Yesterday, we got a legal notice from a pharmaceutical company. So we have been doing this series on the cough syrup deaths in India, or cough syrup deaths done by for which pharmaceutical companies in India were responsible. These deaths happened in other countries. So we wrote about this one company called Maiden Pharmaceuticals. Its medicines were used in the Gambia and children allegedly died. They have sent us a legal notice because they don't want us to pursue the story, which we will. But legal intimidation is high like never before, and that's not by the government. That is by, industrialists mainly, and also politicians to some extent.
Yeah, and I think there's one more thing that's not quantifiable, right? And those of us who worked in newsrooms understand this. This self-censorship that is the most dangerous thing, right? Because your access is cut off. You could lose your job, or you're treated unfavorably for not towing the line. So most of the journalists today will say that I am free, I am not intimidated in any of these quantifiable ways, but they start thinking this is the only way to survive. So it's not journalism in that sense at all. And I think that is one of the biggest damaging factors for our journalism today.
No, the silencing is happening at various levels, and self censorship is certainly one of them. And, even in terms of cases, there's now an approach where a case even need not be filed, but the whole intimidation and using central agencies. So, whether it's the ED or IT agencies, or whether it's the Money Laundering Act, or whether it's the NIA. And the NIA is emerging. Again, it was set up during, the UPA rule, but it has been weaponized over the past 10 to 14 years, 10 years particularly, where there is almost no accountability, no transparency, no oversight. So you have NIA summoning journalists randomly, making them sit, in the office, on the local police station, not even telling them what the charge is, like what is the problem. So that itself is a huge form of intimidation where you're liable to be summoned. Again, nothing on paper, so it doesn't get recorded. And particularly in places like Kashmir, journalists are not even anymore willing to talk about it because they're like, how much do we keep saying we were summoned 3 times in the last month? But it's clear because the intimidation not only to them as individual journalists or their media house, but their families, elderly parents and so on. So this kind of tactic of intimidation has no record. And that is what is really worrisome, because what do you fight? The cases, this was also an RSF report in 24, where they found a number 28 deaths, in fact, of journalists since 2014. And most of these, more than half of these, were covering environmental issues. So, and real estate, land grab, environmental issues by maybe smaller parties, a smaller realtor or a smaller builder and so on, not massive environmental projects necessarily. So after these are killed, the conviction rate for those who have perpetrated these crimes is so low as to be negligible. Since data has been recorded, that is 1990 is when there's been sort of a regular monitoring. There have been, I think, 5 convictions, in more than 140 killings since then. And even if they are convicted, recently we saw in the case of, Ramchandra Chhatrapati, the journalist who was killed by, the leaders. It was masterminded by the leader of a religious sect, and he has now been acquitted. So after all these years of struggle, so where then is the recourse? And I think which is why India stands very high on any global impunity index, which shows lack of accountability and lack of justice within the country. CPJ has now stopped putting out these indices, but the last one, I think 2024, India was 13 on the index, which is pretty high, and in the company of Haiti and Israel and occupied Palestine and so on, where there is actually active war and conflict.
And I think the real fighters, also the people who are most affected by these, are the journalists who are working out of smaller districts,
Yes,
the freelancers.
absolutely.
Because the kind of intimidation, they have to work out of the zones that they report on. Like for us, we are just going to a place, reporting on something and coming back. In many of our NWMI conferences, there are women journalists who come and talk about how they are reporting from, let's say, a tribal village. They are reporting on the problems there, maybe mining, illegal mining, etc. And they have to live in the same community, day in and day out. In fact, as we speak, just 2 days ago, we saw a journalist named Jagan Mohan Reddy was hacked to death in Chittoor district of Andhra Pradesh. And we are not even able to create a lot of noise about it. It is said that he had reported on red sanders smuggling and he was killed perhaps by smugglers. So this is happening in a South India state. So, we are, of course, smaller independent media. And I'm very proud that last 12 years, not just the News Minute, a lot of these organizations, despite all the intimidation, have carried on. But I still believe that we don't face even half of what people working out of these lone wolves in all these places face. They're much more in danger.
And they're disowned by the media who actually even commission reports for them, They're called, broadly speaking, they are news gatherers, they are journalists. They might have other occupations. That's simply because they can't afford to survive on a stringers, not even a salary. The payments are pathetic. People are getting 200 rupees still to file 500 words. That's still the case. So, I mean, they might have a PDS distribution thing or a gas agency or whatever it is, but they take great pride in being journalists. They say, "Main patrakar hoon," I'm a journalist. For them, the rest of it is just livelihood, and this is their calling or their passion. And often, when there's trouble, those who've sent them out on some very dangerous beats just disown them, saying that we have nothing to do with them. So there's no protection either in the job situation, there's no protection through police, there's no protection anywhere. So I think it's up to us to keep raising it. And I'm glad that, one does monitoring, or somewhere there is a bit of, accountability and a bit of, I think, recognition that these are the people doing important work of news gathering, whether they get bylines or not, whether they're recognized as journalists or not, whether they get a salary or not, because many of them have to gather advertisements, and that is their commission, that they get no salary, but as many ads as they get. And that is such a distorted way of earning money in journalism. And we keep talking about conflict of interest, but that is survival for them. There is no other way.
I was in a panel once with a journalist from Madhya Pradesh, and it was his wife, I think, who had come, and she was saying about how theft cases were filed on this journalist just because he had written something on COVID. So very random cases, theft cases. Here, look at what the Telangana police have done. They have sent a notice under UAPA to a social media handle called Telugu Scribe, saying that disclose who you are. Now, okay, you can question Telugu Scribe on whether they are putting out disinformation, misinformation, etc. But to invoke a section like UAPA, you can even say they are owned by political opposition. It is just not justified, right?
But that's not illegal, no, Danya. Even opposition has a right to.
No, I'm saying even if you're
technically,
saying they are responsible for misinformation or fake news, as the term goes, using UAPA is the extreme. I also want to add that we are not scared of legal notices at all. In fact, yesterday, when the legal notice come, we congratulated Maria, but we don't want for unnecessary things.
Yeah. I
For
mean,
our
then we'll have to
stories-
sit and back it up, and those journalists are not going to come in.
Yeah, for our stories, please do send us legal notices. We will see you in court. Lakshmi, yeah.
Yeah. No, again, I think this whole criminalization and vilification of journalists, like you're saying, the Telugu Scribe incident where you're calling it terrorism, instead of disinformation. Yes, it may not be professionally done, it may not be verified, there may be no editorial filter. These are concerns all of us share, that, when there are the line between verified news and social media output is blurring. I mean, each of them have their roles to play, and it is something that we all keep discussing. But when you're going to create an atmosphere that journalists are criminals, they are prostitutes, I mean, basically the vilest kind of abuse for them, and terrorism, which then justifies a few months later UAPA cases, or cases of harming communal harmony and blah blah. It lays the ground for that, and I think which is why many times when we put out statements or protests, people are like, "What's the point? These guys are just going to keep saying that." But when it's normalized and when it is just part of normal discourse, is when it becomes a problem, because it's just soon very easily shifts from there. And I think that's again a global trend, because in the Philippines, there's one journalist who's been in jail for now, I think 6 years. This whole system of red tagging they have, where red tagging, you label a journalist as a communist. If they question anything, or they talk about the poor, or they talk about the marginal, you get red tagged. And that then becomes a justification to slap any kind of case on you, keep you in jail, don't give you bail, and so on. And that's the similar kind of trend here where you label somebody urban Naxal or whatever, and that then becomes license to do anything which might otherwise seem outrageous, that
Even when Gauri
It's-
Lankesh was killed,
yes.
there were so many people justifying it, right?
Yeah.
So because they're constantly shaping public opinion, and many from our own fraternity, so-called journalists, are actually enabling this, right? They say, okay, these people are urban Naxals, they are
But
not
tomorrow, if
journalists.
something happens to
Yeah.
us,
Yeah.
people are going to say, oh, so
they deserve
they are
it or
anyway
what-
paid by
Anti-nationals,
anti-nationals, some crap they'll say. I was at the International Journalism Conference this year, and in the panel that I was part of, there was a Lebanese and a Syrian journalist. And the Lebanese journalist, all women journalists, she was talking about how they were on a Google Meet with a lot of journalists talking about stories when suddenly there were explosions in the house of at least 3 people in that call because houses of journalists were being selectively targeted, right? And the topic was also about decolonizing. How do we decolonize news? And there was concern that with Trump coming in, a lot of the funding to media houses from different American sources have been cut down. And now Europe has stepped in, where much of the funding has come from European agencies. So we are not getting decolonized from one to the other we are moving. And they were actually explaining that if they have to pitch a story from Syria or from Lebanon and it has to be carried by an international agency, then they have to find an angle which is appealing to the American or the European. So like Indian media outlets will say, this Indian worker has been impacted in Lebanon because that's the connection which we want to draw. So they're like, we don't want to do stories continuously which will appeal to an audience. We want to tell our stories just about our people, but we don't have the outlets. So my long point is when I go for these conferences and I sit and listen to those people, I think, okay, maybe we are having it better here. Then my brain immediately tells me that relatively we may be better in some way or the other because we are not a completely conflict-ridden zone. But that's also the reason why we must fight more to make sure that things do not become any worse than what it is, and that we have to fight to make it better. So every time as a chairperson of DigiPub, almost every 2 weeks we write condemnation statements, and people joke about it saying that, what's the use of you guys writing a condemnation? I'm saying we are recording history. Every time we must say this has happened. And every time we must condemn, because the moment we stop doing that, like you said, it just becomes normal.
Yeah, no, and people have to look back or even look around them now and say somebody is saying something. Somebody is standing up and saying this is not okay, Whether it's effective or not is a different point. But again, I think it's that critical mass. If enough people say this is not okay, there can be some slight change. So even all of these IT rule amendments, all these new laws, data privacy and so on, it's great. I mean, people say, what is the use of these revision petitions in the court? What's the point? But if we don't do that, what happens? All of this just becomes law and, everyone's subjected to it, or you fight. I mean, maybe there may not be a change, but then at least there is that discourse created that it is not okay. And these are the problems with these amendments and laws. And I think that's very, very important.
I swing violently between 2 days of the week. I'm like, what is the point of doing this? 5 days of the week, like I'm like, yes, we will do it.
No, but I think another important point is when you're arguing in court, that's recorded for, on record. And even if 5 publications report on it and 50 people read it and get convinced that, yes, this is a worthy cause, I think that in itself is something worth pursuing.
Yes, because, these laws are making just ordinary life criminalized. If the general public, leave aside journalists, the general public has to think twice before putting out a tweet on some very random current affairs thing, that is a dangerous trend. So I think all of this, pushback has to happen so that even the general public, journalists in particular, students, academics, whatever, are able to say that this level of control is unacceptable,
Any final thoughts, Lakshmi, before I wrap up? India at 157. Yay.
No, I think, again, we cannot be complacent simply because we are not in a war zone with bullets flying over our heads. There are other forms of weapons being used, and they're being used on a daily basis. So, and I think that is something we need to even make citizens aware of. and aware of little ways to fight. Because when you have governments, big money, corporates, and all of these social media platforms all holding hands together like a wall against the public and the media, you do need to find little chinks and work your way on it, because I think giving up is not an option, because then you're just going to get snowed under. We all know the compulsions of these platforms as well. I mean, they've never stood for free speech. They have never stood in the public interest. So again, it is small fights, and I think you guys are doing a great job, because that is itself inspiring. That, it may be a very asterisk kind of image in the mind, but yes, and maybe someone dipped your lolly
I'm the
in
Obelix.
magic potion. But that's what one needs.
Okay. And I just want to tell the viewers that Lakshmi and her colleague Geeta Seshu, you should read, and with a lot of other people, some of the researches done by them on the Indian media. I specifically like this one where you looked at primetime news and how much of primetime news is toxic masculinity plus just men shouting. They won't even have women on the panels.
That was an NWMI study, though.
Yes.
Yeah.
So a lot of interesting surveys. And this time you have looked at freedom of speech in all the election bound states,
Yes,
right?
that's right. We just release it pre the election, because again, it's to look at ground reality there, and not necessarily attacks only on the media, but looking at the free speech ecosystem. So also looking at attacks on the academia, student protests, I mean, anyone raising their voice. So, I mean, and the situation is pretty dire in, wherever you look. And I think it is not one government. Of course, certain states and certain governments, it's very obvious. I mean, the hate speech and totally unregulated, obnoxious views on the media, polarization, communalization, all of that is there. But even states where you would expect that this might not be the case, do have issues of censorship. We've seen that in Tamil Nadu. I mean, there's a lot of, and again, we've seen in Tamil Nadu, it's been more like a center versus state fight. But then again, using central agencies, whether it is censorship of films or, whatever else form of control there is. And I think that is the kind of thing one is resisting, even in free speech collective and other smaller groupings, where you're looking at this mass kind of hegemony, control over media by fewer, media houses or fewer corporate houses, control over the media, just using one or two laws, and that law is enough to scare and silence people. So I think these are the trends, because when you're looking at independent media and smaller collectives, smaller things happening, YouTubers, and this is what authoritarian states don't like. They don't like a whole crop of YouTubers out there doing their thing and looking at, a blocked drain here, of, failed ICU there. They don't want that. So therefore, then, rather than getting after each one and sending some mafia don after them, you make these laws, and fully hand in hand with the platforms who also don't want people expressing freely. So I think we're at a time where we do need to push back on this kind of control at every level.
Yeah, I think the biggest threat for them is a media that you can't control in any way. That is and how they have actually operated is, if you can't control, then make sure their credibility is eroded,
Which is a very Trump formula also.
It's a very Trump formula. So now people start, you prepare people to accept any action that you may take against them. Even if you don't take action, their work becomes immaterial, because what they're saying, they say, comes because Soros is funding somebody and nonsense like that.
So my final thoughts are, whenever I go to colleges, any college that I speak in, students will ask, how do I understand which media to trust? So I tell them, you have to go to more than one source. There is no one source that you should look at. And please don't think that whatever your favorite Instagram content creator is saying needs to be true. You must do some basic research on it. But what I want to tell everybody is that when you read news, you must also question who owns that media. It's not enough that there's an ideological tilt. That's okay. People have all kinds of ideological tilts. But who owns the media makes it much more precarious than that media house having an ideological tilt, because then everything changes. The way they cover even mundane news stories will be very different. So that's about it.
Yeah.
Too much of doom. But still, we will
And
continue
we
to
will
do
fight asterisks.
all our
No, that
stories.
also
Yeah.
gives us that push to keep continuing with what we're doing. If it's 157, then we have to work harder now.
Yeah. Okay, so recommendations.
I
Pooja?
genuinely don't have any. I haven't watched anything new. I haven't read. I'm just consumed by elections. So maybe by next South Central, I'll do something fun.
Yeah, my recommendation is this book called Shame by Annie Arnox. It's like the small, tiny book, but it's like very powerful. It's about how one moment of family violence during her childhood fundamentally, changes her as a person. And it talks about how growing up between different social worlds, socioeconomic classes impacts us forever. And, you get into the space where you don't fully belong in either world, and how she overcomes that and how she becomes a writer and everything. It's like a very great book.
Okay, so I think when I have a lot of work, I end up actually reading or watching more. I have this very I don't know, please don't curse me for this recommendation. There's this Chinese series called Pursuit of Jade on Netflix. It has got like really good looking people. So just watch for them, and it's like one of those king and queen stuff, right? It's got some 50 episodes, I think. I haven't watched all that, but yeah. I was also rereading Gloria Steinem's Outrageous Acts and Everyday Rebellions. I like that part where, she goes into Playboy and becomes one of the Playboy bunnies to expose how Playboy was misusing women and sort of, I don't know, misusing is not the word, abusing them rather. And a lot of other things. So I find it good to read that again and again. I mean, some of those stories, because it just tells you, go back to the basics, right? Go back to the basics, even in reporting.
Yeah.
Do you have a recommendation, Lakshmi? Any book?
I don't know if it's a recommendation, but I just saw Michael, and it was like a blast from the past because, somewhere the audience is full of young people, including my own daughter. And they just don't know what a big superstar he was, because I think music also, it just like almost fades away when it is not, I guess, generated enough or whatever. And I expected the audience to be jumping and dancing and all of it. Everyone was just sitting and watching. And it comes across as this very sweet, feel good story despite childhood abuse. This guy, comes out, and there's a lot of stuff about his love for animals. So there's a lot of these cute sequences with his chimpanzee and giraffe and llama and all of it. And it's been, there's been a lot of controversy about why were all the, negative aspects not put in. But it ends at a high point in 1988. So by that time, the sexual harassment and sexual abuse allegations
come up.
were not public. Maybe they were there, but they were not public. And then there's this talk that there'll be a sequel and thing. So I think I was one of the few people who waited till the end. The credits roll on forever and ever to see who gave permission for the movie. And, when celebrities leave their estates suddenly, I guess he had legal advice, but who were the people taking decisions? Because it's all his original music, and his nephew, who looks remarkably like him, is lip syncing, and I think a little bit of music also. But, what was curious was who takes decisions about making movies and, in a way, recreating that in public, Like, would journalists do a different job from a feature film or a Hollywood film? Because I can't imagine a journalist doing a biopic without mentioning any of this, So it's like,
But the
what is
naysayers
truth?
would say that nothing was proved, so why have it in a movie?
Well,
Yeah, no, I'm just saying, but it's actually a little scary, right? If music itself does not transcend generations, how will history permeate? How
But
will people know?
whitewashing is a very Indian
No, I'm just saying the
thing also.
knowledge about Michael Jackson, his music, what he stood for. If people don't listen to his songs now, we think that music is something
Yeah,
which can transcend generations, right? If that doesn't, then what will? Thank you for that, Lakshmi.
It's been a very bleak episode, I feel.
No, but I
We
gave
just
Pursuit
feel
of
like-
Jade as the
Yeah,
as the
okay.
recommendation. Watch it, everybody. Very good looking people. Yeah. Okay. So thank you very much, Lakshmi and Pooja. To my producer for the week, Jasim Ali, and helping him is Megha Mugundan. It was Bhuvan's last week as producer. And yes, we gave a good send off with hot chocolate it was cold chocolate this time he loves. Thank you to Ajay, our production assistant, Sukanya Shaji, who's listening into the show. And thank you to everyone. Remember, this is Press Freedom Month. Do not forget to subscribe to the News Minute and News Laundry.